Hello, I'm Will. I'm with Sienna, and Kaylee, and our biblical interpretation project is about Balaam and the donkey, and it's found in Numbers 22 through 23. And the story follows our protagonist of Balaam, and he is a sorcerer slash prophet in the land of Moab under King Balak. The Israelites are traveling through the land of Moab on the way to the promised land, and King Balak asked Balaam to curse the Israelites in order to defeat them. On his way to King Balak, an angel appears before Balaam and the donkey, but Balaam cannot see him. Therefore, the donkey will not move. Balaam beats the donkey. God took pity on the donkey and granted him the ability to speak, and the donkey told Balaam that the angel, it was about the dangers of the angel with the sword in the narrow pass.
So concerning the cultural context of the book of Numbers, when we look at the story of Balaam and his donkey, Balaam was a sorcerer, and so during that time, sorcerers were also seen as prophets, and since the Holy Spirit had not yet come on to Christians, and were in that time Jews, they looked to prophets or seers or sorcerers to interpret basically the spiritual world into our physical world. And so Balaam, even though he was not a prophet like the prophets that we see in the Bible and like what we take some of our teachings from, he was a secular prophet, and God worked through him and used him to minister to the people around him, since he was very spiritual and was able to see into the spiritual world, unlike most of the people. So he brought that into the physical world. And that was just common practice, culturally accepted in that time period. Another thing is with animals. Animals were looked on upon with seers and sorcerers and spiritual people. They were constantly trying to interpret animals' behavior, even if it was like very simple things, as a good omen or a bad omen, or with animal sacrifices, they would absorb certain things. So with the donkey, that was seen a lot of times. Animals were a way that the gods communicated with the people around them. And so that's why Balaam might not have been as surprised when the donkey started to speak, just because he was constantly looking to animals as a spiritual interpretation of what was going on. So that's some context into what the world looked like in the book of Numbers.
All right, hey guys, I'm going to be doing the took part of our story, which is Balaam and the donkey, and which is mostly just like the application. And there's 4 main points that we kind of pulled from this, so let's get started. The first one is searching for and listening to God's voice in unlikely places. So in this story, the 2 main people that God is speaking through, obviously, is Balaam and the donkey. The more obvious one is the donkey.
So really the most important thing that we need to realize from this is that God is truly willing to work through anyone to get his gospel message across. So
not only is it super weird already that God is choosing to speak through a donkey, but also he's speaking through Balaam, who is either considered to be a prophet or a sorcerer, depending on where you look. Anyway.
Sorry.
No, you're good. So anyway, if I kind of leaned more towards the prophet side of things, just because he did choose to turn to God through a couple different matters just in the story alone. And when you think of a prophet, you generally think of someone who is supposed to be a messenger for God, who's supposed to be a messenger for God before like the Holy Spirit existed in the Old Testament. And so because of this, you think that he's more of a holy man on God's side of things, but instead we see very clearly through the story that he is listening to his own prideful and evil things that are going on in his heart, and listening to his own sinful human nature instead of what God is asking him to do. So because of this, it's a little strange that God is using Balaam, who is clearly a very sinful man, but still using him to get God's message across.
So what's really important about this is that we are able to quiet our own hearts and our own minds, so that we don't become so distracted with all the different things in the world that we miss what God's really trying to tell us. It's really easy to look for God in our Bibles, in our pastors, in our Old Testament professors, and just focus on those things, which are all good things, but then forget to spend time in prayer and look for him in the unlikely things, like we would never think to look to a donkey. Okay, so we're gonna get through these next 3 points really fast because Loris's phone's about to die. Okay? All right, so the second point is about allowing God to use each one of us according to his will despite our own sinful past. So what's basically really important about this is just how Balaam was super sinful, God still chose to use him in his life. And it's really, easy for us to say that, okay, we have like so much junk, we have so much sin in our lives, we have so many things that we've done wrong. Like, how could God ever use us to share his love, share his gospel message? But luckily for us as Christians, God says, like, I want you, I want your broken, I want all of your failures, everything, and I'm going to use you for my message. Then the third point is about free will and God's ultimate authority. So in this story, Balaam obviously had free will because even though at first God said, no, don't go to Moab, the second time he asked God about it, he said, okay, you can go, but only if you have the right intentions at heart. Even though he didn't, he still went. But what's really important about this is even after Balaam ended up getting all the way to Moab, because he did, he wasn't able to curse the Israelite nations. He actually ended up blessing them. So, and then finally the fourth point is about accepting God's grace and forgiveness. So God could have very easily allowed Balaam and the donkey to run into the angel that was in their path, and that probably would have ended with them dying. But instead, God allowed the donkey's eyes to be opened and for the donkey to have enough reason to stop so that they weren't able to run into him. And he did that because he had grace and mercy and love for them. And what's really cool about this point is there's a lot of New Testament application. A lot of times in the Old Testament, we see a God who people are afraid of, a God who doesn't seem to show a lot of grace or mercy or love. Those are more so just traits that are attributed to the New Testament God. But what this really shows is that the New Testament God and the Old Testament God are the same God, and they both show grace and love and mercy for us.